I'm Luie Refutation, and I will be responding to Devin's claim that more relaxed gun control laws will have two distinct advantages for California residents. His two supporting claims are looser gun control laws will result in lower violent crime rates, and relaxing gun control laws could create as many as 9,630 jobs for California. So back to his first claim that looser gun control laws will result in lower violent crime rates. It is true that violent crime rates have been dropping. However, a document from the Bureau of Justice Statistics on firearm violence shows data collected from 1993 to 2011 shows firearm violence accounts for 70% of all homicides. They also show that violent crime with other weapons has been decreasing or stayed the same in the same time. All this really shows is that homicides have been decreasing and firearms have still been the primary source for homicides. The Washington Post also shows that the United States is the 26th highest rate in the world for percentage of homicides by gun. Even if homicides have been going down, this is showing that firearms are the primary cause for these homicides. Another document from the Bureau of Justice Statistics. Since the inception of the Brady Act, over 118 million applicants for firearm permits were subject to background checks. About 2.1 million were denied. That's only 1.8%. In 2010, 1.5% of the 10.4 million applicants for firearm permits were also denied. The advocate wants us to have looser gun control laws, but it already seems that they're pretty loose. It's pretty easy to get a gun, only about 2% get denied. So if we were to make this looser, it'd be even easier for people to get a hold of weapons. His second claim is that relaxing gun control laws could create as many as close to 10,000 jobs in California. There are a lot of assumptions with this claim here. His first assumption is that the gun companies will be leaving their states. If this were to happen, he's assuming that they would come to California if we relax our gun laws. Although there's evidence to suggest that if they were to leave, that they would go elsewhere. In an article from Fox News, both small and large business companies are planning to leave California. Some prefer Texas since it has a 0% income tax, while California has a 13.3% on top earnings. Especially in recent years, California has had increased taxes for people and business owners of all sizes. It's not likely that a company would be willing to go to a state with one of the largest tax rates. They would prefer other states with lower income tax rates, such as Texas. And as we know, Texas is already a very gun-friendly state. In another article from Forbes, they write, California has lost 855,200 private sector jobs since 2008. California is also the third worst in the nation in terms of job migration. We're actually losing more jobs than are coming into the state. Many other large companies such as Boeing or other aerospace companies have been moving their production factories outside of the state to reduce taxes. Many of them are going to states such as Alabama, which in fact give tax incentives for these larger companies to make their products. If these gun companies were to leave their states, it's more likely that they would go to another state with lower taxes or more friendlier to guns, such as Alabama and Texas. With this evidence, I've shown that more relaxed gun control laws would not have advantages for California and would, in fact, could be potentially harmful to California residents.
All right, the main and secondary claims are labeled pretty simply. There were only a couple of them to begin with, so that keeps it easy. On the first point, you signpost that nicely. There's an argument here that I think needs to be clarified a little bit, and that's the issue of declining crime rates. It seems to be an implication that the advocate is making that as gun availability has gone up, the crime rate has gone down. There seems to be an implication, for instance, that those two things are connected in some way. I think there's a challenge to be made here on causality, which is okay. Your argument, excuse me, your argument saying that the vast majority of the violent crime is still committed with guns, I think that's okay. But I think in the long run, the demonstration needs to be that that the crime rates are affected by a variety of things, and that the notion that gun ownership is the prime factor here is an inadequate assumption on the part of the advocate, and you don't really come to grips with that argument there. The other part of the argument is, I think, a reasonable one, and that is that there isn't really a limitation on the availability of guns. The advocate seems to assume that there's some restriction on people's access to guns, and I think you've got a pretty good piece of information here that relatively few purchases are denied, that millions of people are buying guns and have since the Brady Act went into effect. So the notion that there is some limitation on their availability is problematic. Now, I don't remember what the advocate's claim was on this exactly. There may have been some argument about concealed carry laws, but that is not brought up here. So if there wasn't an argument about that, then I think you've got a very good point here that addresses that issue. On the second point, considering the notion that they're going to transition and relocate here, to me this seemed like a pretty minor kind of benefit of changing the gun laws in the first place, but you go overboard in slamming it down and suggesting that it's not likely to happen. I thought you did a very good job on that. Let's face it, if you were a gun company, you're going to relocate, even if California changed the laws, which seems extremely unlikely. They're not changing their tax laws, which is discouraging people. They're not changing their business climate, which is discouraging people. There are other places that are much friendlier and are providing substantial advantages to people who locate there. I think you've got a pretty good argument here that it's unlikely that any of these places any of these companies would migrate to California and provide the jobs here. So I thought that was a good counterclaim on that argument. At the very end, you make this argument that there's a potential harm from changing. I didn't hear you list a potential harm or provide any documentation for it, so I don't think you want to put it in your concluding statement. I think you just want to stick to the arguments that you made. All right, thank you.